Hello and welcome to the weekly rushes, your rush through all the weekly movie news and streaming news. And here I am with my The Last of Us hat on, but I'm internally screaming, or I certainly would be externally screaming if those fungal monsters were coming towards me. Are you enjoying The Last of Us as much as we're enjoying The Last of Us? We're loving it. It's been quite a slow movie and streaming news landscape for the last couple of weeks, but finally there's been enough froth for us to get some juicy bits and bobs from the world of movies, streaming, casting, off-screen news, on-screen news, all that kind of stuff. As ever, we're going to start with some of the more contentious stories in the press, and we're unfortunately going to start with, but unfortunately and fortunately, it's a good end to this actually, this story. Harvey Weinstein, who has been sentenced to a further 16 years after being convicted of another rape and sexual assault in Los Angeles. And these 16 years are going to be bolted onto the end of his 23 years that he's already received. Given the fact that he's 71 years of age, let's do the maths. 23, 16, 39, 110. I don't think Harvey Weinstein is going to make it to there. He was acquitted on a number of other counts, or certainly one other count, and he was convicted on 3 counts of rape and sexual assault. So he will essentially spend the remainder of his life in prison. It just shows you that the hashtag #MeToo story continues to rumble on. At the other end of the spectrum, Alec Baldwin's case, obviously we've covered that almost extensively across the weekly rushes. He's pleaded not guilty in the Rust shooting court appearance. They've already downgraded the possible punishment he could receive by dropping a firearm enhancement to the prosecution, which could have seen him going away for a potential 5 years. So he's still being tried. He could face 18 months. He's being done in a sense for criminal negligence. Also, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the film's armourer, she made her first appearance on Friday, and one of the interesting aspects around that was she was allowed to keep a gun at her residence because I believe she has been threatened regarding her role on the Rust film. She's accused of involuntary manslaughter for loading the gun and failing to make sure that all the rounds in the gun were dummies. I think she seems to be in a much more vulnerable place than Alec Baldwin. But curiously, Baldwin is back in Montana shooting the film. I mean, this is the part of the whole thing that I find absolutely bizarre, is that with the agreement of the dead cinematographer Helena Hutchins' husband, they're continuing to make the film. They're going to complete the film. And so you've got this curious dichotomy between the producer and star of a film that's still being made being charged for a murder that happened on his shoot. I think the consensus opinion is that he's not going to be found guilty, but I do think that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the armourer, is looking certainly more vulnerable than Alec Baldwin. Interesting. What do you make of the new Little Mermaid? We saw the teaser a while back. I think another clip was shown from it. This is the one starring Halle Bailey, not Halle Berry, as a lot of people kind of mistakenly call her, but Halle Bailey, who obviously when the teaser was revealed, there was a huge racist backlash around the fact that a black person had been cast as Ariel, in a sense. She's done an interview in The Face, and she talks about the way in which her mentor, and I guess you could call her buddy now, Beyonce, gave her some sort of sage advice, but it's not entirely radical advice, and just simply said, don't ever read the comments on social media. Halle Bailey said, as a black person, you expect it, and it's not really a shock anymore. I know people are like, it's not about race, but now that I'm Ariel, people don't understand that when you're black, there's this whole other community. It's important for us to see ourselves. And so The Little Mermaid is due to be released in May this year. I mean, obviously there's the bigger kind of discussion, should they be turning all of their kind of, animated classics into real life films? But I have to say, the backlash that poor Halle Bailey's received, it is just so unnecessary and archaic and out of the arc. It's just ridiculous. Paul Mescal has been talking about male body image. Obviously, he's been nominated for an Oscar for his performance in Aftersun. He was also nominated for a BAFTA for his role in Aftersun. Aftersun winning, I think, best debut by a producer, director, or writer for its director. And of course, we reported a while back that he's been cast without even having to audition in the Gladiator 2, the sequel. Ridley Scott, so smitten with Paul Mescal, he cast him straight away. But apparently there's been lots of discussion online about whether Paul Mescal has the body, the shape, the strength, the look of a gladiator. And he says, I'm just not interested. I'm past that. I do like the sound of this guy. Paul Mescal sounds very like sort of unshowy, offy and un-Hollywoody and all that kind of stuff. He talked about in an interview recently the physical preparations that he knows he's going to have to go through to play the adult Lucius. He's playing adult Lucius, who's the young nephew of Roman Emperor Commodus, originally played by Joaquin Phoenix. As Paul Mescal says, this guy's got to fight and he's got to be a beast, and whatever that looks and feels like is right for me, and it's what it's going to be. But again, it's just a reminder that there's as many, well, not as many, but there are pressures on men too to beef up, shape up, look good, get the abs, do all of that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's quite an intimidating prospect, isn't it? I mean, if I was told suddenly I had to look like a gladiator, I think I'd probably go into Joe Wick's Hitsville for about a year. Oh, this story is about one of our increasingly favourite actors. I mean, he's been one of mine and Maddie's favourite actors for quite a long time. This is Barry Keoghan, who, you know, Banshees of Inisherin. I know a lot of people comment under these things about the Banshees, saying just don't get it, just don't get it, just don't get it. It's an existential film. It's like the play Waiting for Godot. It's kind of like, yeah, nothing happens, but it's about nothing happening in friendship. It's about the absences and the omissions. It's about the nothingness and what that means. Anyway, Barry Keoghan, he won a BAFTA for Best Supporting Actor earlier this week, and obviously he's been nominated for an Oscar too. But his next project, or one of his next projects, I think it's possibly going to start shooting in 2024, is an intriguing one and an interesting one, and one that is a passion project for him. The director of a film he was in some years ago called American Animals, Bart Layton, he's teaming up with Barry Keoghan to make a Billy the Kid project, and I think this is a good fit. Barry Keoghan feels a huge amount of identification with the backstory of Billy the Kid, and you know, when you dig into the backstory of Billy the Kid, and this is something that Barry Keoghan has done, he apparently, when shooting American Animals, he brought this story, he brought the human story, the non-notorious mythical story of Billy the Kid to the director Bart Layton, and he related, Barry Keoghan talks about how he really related to Billy the Kid's equally complicated childhood. He was also of Irish descent. He was orphaned, Billy the Kid, at the age of 15. And of course, Barry Keoghan lost his mum when he was just 12 years old and was passed through the foster care system countless times. I think he was in something like 14 different foster homes. So he had a very sort of difficult upbringing. And Barry Keoghan himself has talked about the fact how, you know, he very much remembers sort of forks in the road where he could have gone down the route of criminality, getting lost in that world, and, you know, instead managed to sort of, as he says, fortuitously and rather luckily, go into sort of, well, a life that who could have ever imagined it. So Keoghan really relates to this. He really wants to bring a human sort of, you know, aspect to the, as I say, the myth of Billy the Kid. He says, Barry Keoghan says, I remember reading about Billy the Kid as a kid, but as we were digging into the project, there were so many things I discovered about his life. There were so many eyewitness accounts and lots of different versions of his story that didn't add up, but that contributed to the legend. I felt related to Billy the Kid in the sense of him being a mummy's boy, but obviously I took a different path, turning my circumstances into something positive. I think this is going to be fantastic. I think a character study of Billy the Kid, humanising and understanding, not sanctioning and justifying, but humanising and understanding these sort of historically violent characters is always intriguing, and I can see why it really appeals to actors. Ryan Reynolds, we're all who isn't a fan of Ryan Reynolds? I mean, I suppose there will be someone somewhere who finds his perkiness bloody irritating. Well, apart from being one of the financiers of Wrexham Football Club in Wales, he's going to star in a new film, or he's developing a new film with his director buddy Sean Levy, who also directed or is directing Deadpool 3. He's starring in a new film called Boy Band. There's not an awful lot known about this, but I think we can pretty much guess what it's going to be. It's co-written by Ryan Reynolds, but also a chap called Jesse Andrews, who was responsible for writing the film Me, Earl and the Dying Girl, which was a brilliant film, and I was shocked to find out that came out in 2015. Wow. Ryan Reynolds, combining with, as I say, Sean Levy, the director, on a film called Boy Band. It puts me in mind, presumably it's going to be a comedy, but it puts me in mind of the film Pop Star Never Stop, Never Stopping. And if you haven't seen that, is it Andy Samberg, I think, the star in it? It's like a modern day version of This Is Spinal Tap. It's an absolute treat. It's hysterical. It's funny. It's rude. It's very rude. It takes it to the very edge, but it's well worth watching. And I do think that is a huge bar that any film that Ryan Reynolds does about a boy band needs to sort of reach to or surpass to be in any way successful. This actor, I've talked a bit, I wasn't a fan of Bohemian Rhapsody. I didn't think I was a fan of Rami Malek, and I was quite critical, sort of saying, that was more an impersonation than a performance. The more and more I see Rami Malek, and the more I come across him, and the more I just see his photograph, the more fascinated by him I become. Well, Rami Malek is to star in a new thriller called Amateur, which is coming from the director of Slow Horses. And the blurb is, it follows a CIA cryptographer who, after his wife is tragically killed in London in a London terrorist attack, demands his bosses go after them. When it becomes clear they won't, due to conflicting priorities, Rami Malek blackmails the agency into training him and letting him go after them. Thus, he's an amateur sleuth. He's an amateur detective who is trained up and heads off to do the job himself. Rami Malek will soon be seen in projects such as Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan. Haven't seen quite what his role is from the trailer yet. And we were talking about recently how he's due to appear and produce a series, a limited series, on the life of the silent cinema star Buster Keaton. But what do you think of Rami Malek? I find he's increasingly fascinating. There was a sort of thriller that starred him and Denzel Washington a couple of years ago in lockdown, and you know, sometimes you sort of think, oh my God, what a weird sort of manner. He has a weird style of acting, which is very much his own, and it's eminently watchable. I remember seeing first time in one of the Night at the Museum films. He was sort of, wasn't he a young pharaoh or something like that? Nicolas Cage. Oh, soon to be seen in Renfield, starring as Dracula, though Renfield is obviously about Dracula's assistant, played by Nicholas Hoult. There's a new project, a new horror thriller being developed, starring Nick Cage and Maika Monroe. This film is called Longlegs. It follows an FBI agent, played by Maika Monroe, and she's basically assigned an unsolved case revolving around a serial killer played by Nick Cage. I'm presuming this is a relatively serious role for a change for Nick Cage. As she investigates, things turn to the occult. It becomes a bit demonic, a bit devilish. Maika Monroe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is known for It Follows. She was in It Follows, which is a fabulously inventive horror film, actually. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. Talking of live-action Disney films, yet another one is being given the live-action treatment. And this is one that I never, and none of the girls ever kind of took to or came to or arrived at. I can't work out if maybe it was sort of too young for them. Zach Galifianakis, he of the Hangover films, is joining the live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch, the film that's set in Hawaii and features Lilo teaching Stitch, which is a strange sort of extraterrestrial creature. I never really quite understood what Stitch was, and teaches him the importance of Ohana, the Hawaiian concept of family, by introducing him to the music of Elvis Presley. I mean, it couldn't get more random if it tried. I mean, I liked Moana, so maybe I would like this. Anyway, this is going to be directed by the director of the current feel-good stop-frame animation, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Dean Fleischer Camp is going to be directing this this live-action version. But the only member of the cast that so far has been confirmed, that we don't know what he's going to play, is Zach Galifianakis, who is a very, very, very funny comic actor. Great excitement in Middle-earth this week after, I have to say, I found the Amazon series in the end quite disappointing. I only got to episode 4, and as a Middle-earthian, I mean, I feel it's my adoptive nation. You know, I feel I should live there. I feel I could live there. I feel like I come from there. I lost interest and just couldn't commit to the final episodes. I just couldn't. Anyway, Warner Brothers, I think they're struggling, Warner Brothers, so they're rinsing their back catalogue, have announced that there are going to be some more Lord of the Rings films. This has been greeted with quite a collective sigh of desperation from Tolkien fans, because you just worry, you know, what are they going to do? Are they going to do the same thing that Amazon did, which is kind of just huge amounts of CGI? It feels like Middle-earthian projects simply focus too much on the bigness, the enormity of the landscape. They get obsessed with Middle-earth rather than where they should get obsessed, which is with the microcosmic elements of a story. I mean, that's the strength of Tolkien's writing, is that yes, you have a well-drawn landscape and fantasy land, but you've got these incredibly detailed, real, well-drawn characters passing through it, and that's the bit that's most interesting. So yeah, so Warner Brothers have announced they're going to make a load more films. Obviously, this is going to be in a different manner. They're going to try and repeat Peter Jackson's success with the Lord of the Rings original trilogy, his The Hobbit trilogy. I thought it was a huge mistake turning The Hobbit into 3 epic, unmanageable films like the first. Peter Jackson and his sort of collaborators said that Warner Brothers have, quote, kept us in the loop every step of the way. We look forward to speaking with them further to hear their vision for the franchise moving forward. Now, I think the reason that's significant is I think if anyone feels that Lord of the Rings could be looked after and attended to meaningfully, then they feel that Peter Jackson's the guy for it. I still feel that even his films were too sort of epic and CGI-y rather than, again, focusing on the person. I mean, obviously he did, but I felt we could have done even more. You know, obviously he gave us Gollum, which was such a great thing, or his iteration of Gollum, which was just fantastic. Warner Brothers also have quite a few films coming out. They've got Shazam coming out soon. They've got The Flash, Ezra Miller, all the contention around that. Warner Brothers got Barbie coming out. I've got this funny feeling Barbie is going to miss. I don't know why. I don't think it's going to be a hit. I think it's going to miss. And they've also got Jason Statham, starring in Meg 2: The Trench. I thought the Meg, the first film, was diabolical. So I hope they make Meg 2: The Trench a little bit more sort of tongue-in-cheek and fun. And in terms of box office achievements, Avatar: The Way of Water has gone back to number 3, the third highest grossing film of all time. How did it do that? It knocked Titanic. Basically, Avatar went above Titanic. Titanic was re-released. Then Avatar sunk Titanic again. So James Cameron, both disappointed and delighted that Avatar is knocking his own Titanic off the list and going past it. So what are the numbers? Well, Avatar: The Way of Water has taken 2.2433 billion globally. I mean, think about that, 2.25 billion. Wow. Nudging it just ahead of Titanic's, also just shy of $2.25 billion. Wow. I mean, the importance and significance of this is, whatever you think of Avatar, this is a huge boost to the theatrical cinematic going experience. So the fact that, you know, Avatar 3, yeah, it's coming out in 2020 later this year, and Avatar 4 is coming out next year, at least cinemas can think, oh, there's going to be a guaranteed payday at Christmas. And on James Cameron, James Cameron, I wonder if he ever can look beyond Avatar. Well, he has slightly. A passion project for him has been The Last Train from Hiroshima, the survivors look back. His hope is to be able to make this as a passion project, but of course he talks about whether he'll be able to let go of Avatar. I mean, will there be more? I mean, surely there'll be pressure to make more Avatars if 3 and 4 do as much business at the box office as Avatar 2 has done. Guillermo del Toro, obviously, he's looking forward to inevitably picking up the Oscar for Best Animation for Pinocchio. He won the BAFTA. He won a Golden Globe, I believe, as well. He's announced that he is adapting for Netflix another stop-frame animation adaptation of Kazuo Ishiguro's historical fiction, The Buried Giant. The book is set, sounds good this, is set in a mythologized 5th century Britain in which an old couple decide to go on a journey. I mean, what would fantasy books and stories do without going on a journey? I wonder if you could write a fantasy book or create a fantasy realm where someone isn't going on a journey. I suppose you have to go on a journey. Anyway, they go on a journey to find the sun they have not seen for several years. Obviously, hindering them is a mysterious mist that envelops the world, full of trolls, ogres, dragons, giants, but also, most importantly, amnesia. Sounds good, sounds good. I've always felt there's something a little bit absent from Guillermo del Toro's films. I don't know what it is. I mean, their execution is sensational, their production design, the look, etc. There's always something, just a little something missing. So in the world of streaming, what's happening in the world of streaming? Steven Spielberg, he made an interesting announcement at Berlin recently saying, I'm going to make more films like the films I started out making. More Jaws, more Close Encounters, more Indiana Jones, Duel, all that sort of stuff. Well, he's looking to bring a new series, a limited series, to HBO. And this is basically a Stanley Kubrick project that Stanley Kubrick was trying to get made. And it pivots around, obviously, Napoleon Bonaparte. Of course, Ridley Scott is making his own film version with Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon. I think it's called Kitbag, certainly a shooting title. Well, Spielberg's wanting to make a limited series, which, well, obviously, Stanley Kubrick was going to make a film, but he researched this extensively. He's got books and books and books. He wrote the script in 1961. He had thousands of location photos. He had storyboards, loads of notes, slides. Spielberg wants to pick up Kubrick's project and deliver it to the screen, admittedly, albeit the small screen. But Spielberg says this is based on Stanley's original script, Stanley Kubrick's original script of Napoleon, and they're working on it as a 7-part limited series for HBO. This project is really exciting. One of my favourite ever David Cronenberg films. I, in fact, started a PhD writing about this film and the cinema of David Cronenberg. It's a film called Dead Ringers, which starred Jeremy Irons as the twin surgeons, or the twin doctors, the Mantle twins, Elliot and Beverly Mantle, and their lives were so entwined that they shared lovers, they shared drugs, they shared desires, they shared everything, and they also shared a desire to kind of transform in a rather sinister fashion sort of the gynecological processes around women. Very odd concept, but of course Jeremy Irons played both twins, and so it was quite a fascinating both prospect for him. But that idea, the project, the David Cronenberg original film, is being adapted or rebooted into a series. I believe it's for Amazon. It's a new limited series for Amazon, but it stars Rachel Weisz. Daniel Craig's wonderful wife, a fantastic actress, and she's playing the two twins, so they're flipping it into two female twins. And so I mean, the thing is, Cronenberg's film is probably quite dated now, but it had so many themes in it of kind of fusion and merging and identity and control and the sort of deathly, sort of awful demise of love and how it would sort of kill them, and how drug addiction kind of, one of the twins couldn't sort of sustain himself, a bit like a sort of Siamese twin that was sort of, you know, wilting and fading because the other twin was stronger, a sort of power struggle, if you like. So I think Rachel Weisz would be a good choice, good casting for a TV adaptation. Sad news, I'm afraid, for any Succession fans. That classic, cracking, brilliant series. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I know a lot of people, we've said, oh, watch it, and lots of people go, no, that's not really my cup of tea. It's a bit sort of businessy. It's a bit sort of, who cares about the lives of billionaires? And I have to confess, we thought that season 3 got very bogged down in the technicalities of a sort of multi-billion-dollar conglomerate, share owners, selling, buying, you know, all that kind of stuff. What's best about it is the way in which this billionaire family, this empire, their family sort of dynamic relationships, the jealousies, the double-crossing, the loyalties, all shifting loyalties, all that kind of stuff. Who's going to inherit what? It's a parallel for most families. Most families have got this shit going on. This is it, just writ large and writ bigger. Jesse Armstrong, the guy behind it, the writer, producer, etc. of the whole Succession shebang, he was also the man behind the Peep Show, funnily enough. He said that the next 10 episodes, season 4, is going to be it. That is it. We are not gonna see any more. And he says this was a tortured decision. He said, I felt unexpectedly nervous about talking about this because it's all theoretical, the end of it, until this point. I've tried to keep it theoretical for a number of reasons. Who knows about the psychological reasons, but the creative ones were that it felt really useful not to make the final decision for ages. He's made the decision though, or has he? Is it going to be one of those where he make, you know, a lot of kind of strands, franchises, series, they say this is the end. It is the end for a considerable amount of time, and then it comes back. I think everyone will want it to come back, won't it? I personally don't think this is the end, but it's the end for now. It's the end for now, which is a bit sad, but I think it might be a good thing. I never get this director's name correct, and I apologise if I don't. Andy Muschietti, I think that possibly sounds right, Italian. Director of the It films, It, the first It, and It 2. He has confirmed that there is a prequel that's been ordered by Warner Brothers. This prequel TV series, presumably, if it's Warner Brothers, will go out on HBO or HBO Max. This is a series called Welcome to Derry, and this is going to be set before the events of the 2017 It. Let's not forget there was an It in the 80s, 90s or whatever. Did it star Tim Curry, I think, as Pennywise? Anyway, so this series is going to be set before. It's going to be set within, obviously, the landscape, the town, the city, the village, whatever, of Derry. And Stephen King says, I'm excited that the story of Derry, Maine's most haunted city, is continuing, and I'm glad that Andy Muschietti is going to be overseeing the frightening festivities. Red balloons all around, says Stephen King, who, I mean, he's a one-man horror factory. I mean, if you didn't have Stephen King, half the studios in Hollywood would have gone bust. Which brings us to some box office considerations. Ant-Man, I just wanted to share this. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. It scored such a low Rotten Tomatoes score, yet it did incredibly well in its opening weekend at the box office. It made something like $120 million, which is robust. It's not the best, but it's robust. I think it's one of their highest President weekends grosses for Marvel. The important thing to remember about how films do at the box office, whether they're considered a success and then whether they get, you know, a further sequel or whatever, is that the first weekend generally always does well. Certainly on a Marvel film or a DC film or something like that. What the numbers that are really important to watch is how much it drops in the second weekend. This film, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, has scored the equal lowest Rotten Tomatoes score of 47% alongside Eternals. And I have to say, I hated Eternals. I know some people loved it, but some people love Ant-Man and Quantumania. Not good, not good. What's worrying for Marvel is that more and more films now are getting a lower Metacritic score. They're getting a lower Rotten Tomatoes score. They're getting a lower audience score on various kind of, you know, voting kind of platforms. And I think this is a problem. I think you know, it's concerning. And I think, you know, other commentators within the business, other studio execs, etc., are sort of saying, is Marvel franchise fatigue kicking in? I think what Kevin Feige, the head of the studio, needs to do is rein things in, release fewer series, only go for 2 films a year, because of course you've got Sony, who always release a mining to death their Spider-Man universe with all these, you know, Morbius, what a disaster disaster that was. Venom and all that kind of stuff, which are kind of okay, but they're sort of B-movie versions of Marvel. I think they need to be careful. The last few films, Thor, Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse, Eternals, and now Quantumania, there's ever diminishing returns critically, and then the fall off on the second weekends is quite dramatic. So I think they really, really need to be careful as they move into phase 5. Which brings us to films of the week, and there's a curious crop of films this week. Probably the most sort of clickbaity and sort of interesting from a headlines perspective is Cocaine Bear. We've been talking about this for ages. We reacted to the trailer, we did a post on Popcorn Junkie's Instagram account. This is the based on a true story. It's important to say based because the grizzly, or the bear that was involved in this, I'm not sure if it's a grizzly or an American brown bear, goes on a sort of drug-fueled rampage, having consumed a bag of cocaine that fell out of an airplane conducting a drug steal. In this film, the bear goes on a sort of murder spree, snorting cocaine and killing people. This is comedy. This is ludicrous. It's meant to be silly. It's meant to be stupid. Ray Liotta's in there. It's got to be good. One of his last performances before he sadly passed away. This is going to be crazy. This is going to be a crazy fest. It's going to be a perfect weekend, Friday night, Saturday night movie when you've had a few beers, or if like me, you've had 35 espressos and you roar uproariously. I hope. The other film this week released is What's Love Got to Do With It? This is a rom-com, a soppy rom-com starring Lily James. I'm a huge fan of Lily James. I like her. It's also got Emma Thompson in there. It's about a documentary filmmaker played by James trying to find Mr. Right by swiping right. It kind of pivots around arranged marriages in Pakistan and things like that, and it kind of focuses on love. It focuses on the way in which we find love, swiping right, arranged marriages, which is the right way, all that kind of stuff. It's a rom-com. I don't think this is going to be lighting up the box office. I don't think this is going to be lighting up critics, but you know, if you fancy something soppy, if you fancy something safe, if you fancy something easy, then perhaps What's Love Got to Do With It is your cup of tea. I do sometimes wonder how these films keep getting made, sort of, you know, quite generic, safe, ordinary, quite uninteresting British films. And finally, we have another film from South Korea called Broker. This is by the director of the recently released and much acclaimed Shoplifters. It's a film that pivots around a character who leaves a baby in a baby box. The baby is then sort of picked up by an adoption brokerage firm or you know, organisation that then essentially moves the baby onto a new family, and then I believe it becomes a sort of search and hunt as they try and find this baby and the original family, and yet the people who go on this search sort of unexpectedly become a family of their own. You know, as with most things from South Korea, this will probably be really interesting. Decision to Leave, obviously, was another South Korean film that kind of really did well. It's been nominated for all sorts of things. Nanny Dai hated it, but perhaps we need to reappraise that. And that's a film called Broker, more of an art house film. Although, why do we just call South Korean films art house? Look at Train to Busan, that's not art house. They make films really well and really interestingly. And there you have this week's Weekly Rushes, your rushed rush through all the movie and streaming news that I've been able to sniff out and find. Tell us what's floated your boat, and we hope you have a wonderful movie watching weekend.